Hi friends! Today I'm going to show you how I made this DIY command center for my family. It has a vintage vibe to it, and all I used were some thrifted items and a little DIY magic. Let's get started. So here's the space that I'm starting with. Very blank canvas, a little space, but perfect for this command center. I started by grabbing this calendar that I already had on hand. It's a dry erase board, works great, but I just don't like the color of the frame. I wanted something more vintage inspired. So I grabbed these materials. I have a primer, paint, and some good old rub and buff. Of course, the first step is always to clean my piece. So I started by cleaning this off and covering the whiteboard so it wouldn't get any paint on it. I was surprised how dusty this thing was. And then I moved on to primer. This is Slick Stick by Dixie Belle. This frame is kind of like a plastic material, and so it's very slick. So I did 2 coats of the Slick Stick and I let it dry overnight before I put any paint on it. The style for this piece, again, I said is vintage. If you think of vintage frames, a lot of them have that pretty green velvet around the middle of the frame and then that gold or brass color around the edges. And that's the look that I'm going for this piece. So I grabbed this pretty green paint color called Collard Greens. You'll see that my frame is actually black. I was going to go a different route and then switched to this green, and I like it much better. It's a beautiful color. So I did 2 coats of this beautiful green, and then I let that dry. Once the paint was dry, I also sealed it with a flat clear coat before I went on to the next step, which is rub and buff. If you've never used rub and buff before, it's like a mixture of clay, paint, and wax all in one. It's very pigmented, a little goes a long way. This is my swatch stick that I made for all the different colors of rub and buff that I have. It's really helpful when I'm planning a project to have swatches available. I chose Grecian gold, which is like a deep brassy gold color. And then I grabbed some brushes, and the ones that I actually ended up using are these makeup brushes. I used like the eyebrow brush and things like that because this needed a much more detailed look. And you'll see as soon as I put it on, it's very pigmented, really beautiful color. But I will say this step took forever. I did not realize how long it would take, and it took a long time because you do have to do a lot of layers to get a really even color when you're using rub and buff over paint. Rub and buff is great for hardware and like feet of jewelry boxes and things like that where you're just doing an overall color and you can just rub and buff it in. But when you're going over paint, it does get absorbed a little more and you have to just keep going over it with coats. It turned out beautiful. I'm happy with it, but it did take a little while. These little detail eyebrow brushes though were perfect for this. So here you can see that I have all the rub and buff painted around the edges. Looks very vintage-like. Then I went back with some cardboard and just worked around the edge of the dry erase board to make sure that was all filled in nicely. Cleaned up the board, made it look nice, and then I moved on to the next step of this command center, which was where we're going to organize all of our junk. We needed a place to hang backpacks and jackets. And so I found this old vintage quilt hanger. It's for hanging homemade quilts. And thank you to my friends on Instagram for helping me figure out what it is. And it has these little peg dowel pieces that you twist in, and it clamps to keep the quilt in place without harming it in any way. And so I just thought it was going to be perfect to hang coats on. And we added 2 more of these little pegs that I got from Home Depot, stained them a very similar oak color. And it's perfect for hanging my kids' coats and jackets on. I also used Big Mama's Butta, just rubbed it all over to reseal the wood and make it smell good. Love this stuff. Then to add to the vintage look, I grabbed these 6 frames from the thrift store. They were each only $1 a piece, and I'm going to put pictures of my family in them to put around the calendar board. And here is how the final look turned out. Don't those frames match the calendar board perfectly? I love how this whole command center came together. My kids have already started using the vintage quilt rack for their jackets and their backpacks, and the space works so beautifully for us, but it also looks nice. This whole thing cost me less than $20, and I hope it inspired you to make a pretty command center in your home as well, using thrifted and repurposed items. Happy painting, friends!